All right, we might make a start. We've got a good number of people with us. Looks like there's still a few joining as we speak. So I might kick things off, Brook. And firstly, for those that I haven't met before, my name's Dan Peterson. I'm the CEO of iBuyNew, and I've got Brook Monahan with me, who's the founder and managing director of Mosaic Property Group. Good afternoon, Brook. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Daniel. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, good to see you again. I'll come back to you in just a few moments. Firstly, thank you for all that have joined today, and hopefully you'll enjoy the next hour. We keep it to a strict, very tight hour. For those that don't know much about iBuyNew, I'll just give you a quick rundown. We're the largest online off-the-plan aggregator of new property in Australia. We've got a national sales team spread across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Perth. And what we do is we help people that are looking to buy off the plan to identify the right property for them. And then we help negotiate them the best deal and secure the property for them. We're effectively an independent broker. We work with literally hundreds of different developers and project marketers across the country. We've got access to literally hundreds of different projects. I think currently we have about 850 projects around the country. But when it comes to Queensland, we work really closely with the Mosaic Property Group. We have an enormous amount of respect for them, and you'll probably learn a little bit why during the course of the next hour. So why are we having a webinar about buying new property in South East Queensland? It's fairly topical at the moment, and there's been a long history of people moving to South East Queensland. I mean, South East Queensland has been a beneficiary, I suppose, of net interstate migration for many years, in fact, several decades now. Somewhat led by Victorians, but not exclusively. And, there's been people from Victoria and New South Wales and other states that have been moving to Queensland for that better climate, better lifestyle, and in some cases just a change in lifestyle. And I think what we've seen over the last 6 months is that really start to get amplified on the back of the unfortunate global pandemic and this COVID situation that we've found ourselves in for the last sort of 6 to 8 months. And that has brought, in a lot of cases, people's plans forward. So people that were thinking about, possibly from Victoria and New South Wales, thinking about relocating to Queensland, or perhaps thinking about buying a holiday home in Queensland, when they know that the likelihood of having overseas travel in the next couple of years might be quite challenged. Some of those plans now being brought forward to either relocate or buy that holiday home, or indeed buy an investment property. So we've seen a flurry of activity over the last couple of months on the back of that. We've also seen, particularly the major banks, start to revise some of their property forecasts for Australia. And when you have a look across, the ANZ and Westpac had over the last 4 to 6 weeks restate their forecast around property prices nationally. And even the last week, we've seen that NAB come out and do the same. When you look across the forecast and break it down by state, what they're expecting to see, particularly Brisbane and the South East Queensland corridor is the real standout. Their expectation is sort of 6 to 8%, even a bit higher in some cases, annual growth. Whereas only 6 months ago, they were talking about declines in property prices nationally across the board between 5 and 15%, which was fairly dramatic at the time. And we haven't seen that eventuate, fortunately. So there's a lot of interest, and there's really strong projections around the South East Queensland market. We think it's a great time to be buying in South East Queensland, whether you're an owner-occupier or whether you're an investor. So we'll get into a little bit of that today, but that's sort of a bit of background to today's webinar. In terms of the format of today, we'll hear from Brook and the Mosaic Property Group about investing in South East Queensland. We'll also then move to hear about 3 specific projects they're developing across the Gold Coast, Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast. And then what we'll try and do is keep about 10 minutes at the back end of today's session to answer any questions you might have. Myself and Brook will be available to answer any questions. If you have questions during the course of the webinar, you won't be able to sort of put your hand up, but what we ask you to do is use the Q&A box within the Zoom feature. You'll see not the chat box, but the Q&A box. If you've got any questions, please pop them into that during the course of the next hour, and in the last 10 minutes, we'll try and cover those off for you. So look, I'll perhaps quickly hand over now to Brook. Firstly, just a quick introduction to Brook. Brook's, as I said before, the founder and managing director of the Mosaic Property Group. The group has been around for about 16 years, and as Brook will talk about in a moment, they've delivered more than 50 projects. I mean, it's a very impressive track record. You got more than 4 projects a year. They take a really unique approach, which is one of the things we love about Mosaic. They take a really unique approach to the way they develop projects, very holistic approach, and Brook will talk a little bit about that. So Brook, do you mind maybe kicking off with just telling us a little bit about Mosaic and how you go about property developments?
Yeah, thanks Daniel, and thanks to all of the iBuyNew crew and all the viewers that have come on today to give up their time. Really great to be part of it. We've had a long-standing relationship with iBuyNew. We love what your platform's about. We've met a lot of your staff over time. They understand research-driven aspects of understanding the different markets under which they're, representing certain projects on behalf of clients, and have become a really good expert in this field. And there's plenty of people portraying to pitch, I guess, a skill set around the research they provide in selling a service. But one of the things we've really learned with the iBuyNew platform over time is understanding really good and balanced, thoroughly researched data that can then be used as a platform to help those people that are looking to buy property in the future, because it is a complex space. It's changed a lot over time. The average person's far more educated today, given the amount of information they've got access to on the internet, but that can also be really confusing, we find. So mate, it's a real pleasure to be here. We love what you guys do. So I guess quickly, before we talk about the market, which is the main purpose of today, for those that don't know Mosaic without boring, and I really appreciate the generous introduction, Daniel. We started with nothing in South East Queensland 16 years ago. So we're a group that's formed on a foundation of really strong design, construction, development skills, but also a sound understanding of finance and funds management and sales and marketing. It's a unique group of people that have come together that have been very loyal to our mission over time, and that's to really understand what the market wants in the key areas that we develop in, and to try and deliver that. And those needs have obviously evolved a lot over the last 15 years, Daniel. So we're really proud of every project we've ever delivered. We've obviously improved a lot in trying to respond to what we think those market demands are over time. And I think the thing that speaks to the Mosaic community these days is that the bulk of our buyers early on in every project that we launch come from existing buyers, or buyers that know other people that already live in an existing Mosaic project, or friends and families of existing Mosaic buyers. So the referral network that's come about from the Mosaic community is because, for the most part, we've got it right over a long period of time in designing, buildings and properties that people love living in, but we've also stayed the course by looking after those assets long over time. So it's a real partnership model. It's about creating enduring value for our clients. I think one of the things quickly that probably defines our business model, better than most, and that's just this. It's a holistic approach to development. So we made the commitment many years ago to become fully vertically integrated. That is, we control every single part of the process, and with 120 full-time staff and about 2,000 subcontractors, consultants, and other key trades that are either fully or heavily reliant on Mosaic Group to earn their income. It's a pretty big business these days, and that covers everything from research and strategy. We're a very research-focused business. We want to understand where we think demographic trends are going to change over time in the core markets, which is South East Queensland for us. Our head office, for those that don't know, in Brisbane, we've got a very big office in both the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast markets. So South East Queensland is certainly our home. And over that time frame, we've been very, very specific about where we develop in those markets. But controlling every part of the process, from design to development to sales, marketing, construction, and then I think really importantly, all the way through to the long-term care of those buildings. So caretaking, asset management, we have a minimum 25-year duty of care post-completion, which as far as I'm aware is pretty unique, if not entirely unique across the Eastern Seaboard. We don't know anyone else that controls every part of the process or stays involved in looking after their key assets for a minimum of 25 years. And I guess that's our commitment to the clients. Most of what we do, Daniel, is, we sell projects that aren't yet delivered. So there's a lot of trust in that process. People are relying on you to do what you say you're going to do. And for us, that forms the ethos of this business. It's our commitment to get better every day and to make sure that we never let anyone down. So a really proud group of people, and happy to look back over time and see some positive landscapes that we've left in the communities where we've developed. So, mate, that's probably enough on the Mosaic side. Do you want me to go into the market?
Yeah, no, that'd be good. That's a good little overview. Thanks, Brook. I mean, perhaps when people are investing in property, or whether they're an investor or an owner occupier, there's many things they need to think about. But from your perspective, what are the most important things when someone should be considering when they're buying off the plan?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've had this chat quite a few times, and we see this quite often when people start talking about, they're buying a property purely for investment purposes. And whilst I understand what it is that they mean, I don't really understand that analogy, because my view is that buildings, properties, they're not just a commodity. They're not just a commodity you go and buy and you get a mortgage and you hope that someone manages a tenant for you. Like, this is they are a really important part of providing critical human needs, and that's shelter. And our view is, when you start to understand what is it that drives people to want to live in certain areas, what is it that drives people to pay a certain amount to either buy a property or to rent a property, because not everyone makes a long-term decision to live in a place of owner occupancy. There's many people that are permanent renters, and they may still be property owners themselves. So our view is understand what drives what makes people want to live where they want to live. So obviously, the key of the three core things around that are amenity, location, and then the design, finishes, and amenities. So the quality of what's been delivered. And I'll touch on one other aspect at the end. But pretty simply, it doesn't matter who you're buying off, whether it's Mosaic or anyone. Our view is that we've been pretty consistent in communicating this over a long period of time. The first one is that we find, particularly, we do a lot of luxury apartment. That's also, covered terraces and townhouses and some infill higher end house and land over time, but mainly luxury apartments in pretty unique locations. And we're finding over time, as more and more demographic sectors make the decision to move to apartment living earlier, not just downsizers, but younger families, upgraders, and people, moving into permanent apartment living or density as soon as the kids leave home. And we think that trend will increase substantially, notwithstanding what we're seeing this year with COVID. We think that trend will increase substantially over the next decade. And so people, when they're trading the old backyard and the large home with space out in the burbs, they're moving closer in because they're time poor. They want more time for social interaction, for family, for exercise, for work, for holidaying. They want security, they want functionality, they still want storage, and they don't want to give up what they had when they had their previous family home, such as a backyard, a veggie garden, maybe a pool, maybe a tennis court, maybe a home gym. And so we're finding requirements for how people want to live and moving to density earlier is based around, they want it to be such that they don't want for anything, yet they don't have to look after and care for it. So we're finding amenities are a really important part, and those requirements of clients have increased substantially in our experience over the last 5 years to 7 years in particular. So what people expect from an apartment complex, a boutique luxury apartment complex now compared to sort of 7 or 8 years ago, is substantially different. So understanding that's really important. Location is a pretty obvious one. For us in the coastal markets, we have to be connected to water, and that can be either the beach or the river. And it doesn't have to be right on the beach of the river. And although we do have a lot of projects that are, as long as it has a strong connection to water, and that can be views, it can be walk score, it can be for people to be able to hear and smell the sounds of the ocean or the river. So I think connection to water is really important. And normally speaking, that means that planning constrains the amount of development in those areas. And that includes both the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast. So you're in areas that are very highly desirable for people to want to live in. They're close to all of the amenity, not just water, but normally your nodes around social infrastructure, coffee shops, restaurants, etc. But planning restricts the amount of development there in the future, yet more and more people are wanting to move there. And we think that increases substantially out of the other side of the recovery, particularly here in South East Queensland. So location is really important, and obviously in the city that's close to schools, hospitals, transport, shopping centres, major transport nodes, and often more than one transport node. So, Brisbane for us, that's bus, train, and can be by water with the City Cat and ferry surface. So the location bit's pretty obvious, I think. Design and quality and finish. So not just how that building feels and looks, what does it feel like? When we talk about this often, it's not what a building always looks like. It's about how does it make people feel when they move into that particular building. So material palettes and finishes are really important, and not just in the context of how they look, but how they're likely to wear over time. Because what's most important when you're buying into a building, particularly if it does have a strata, is that building likely to age well? We talk about this a lot with our buyers. It's why we commit to a minimum 25-year duty of care. We're the builder, we're the designer, and we look after those assets. So when we're delivering those properties, we want to make sure that in 25 years from now, there's not a great onus on those buyers to have to go and make substantial renovations to that building, because the quality of what's been delivered reflects a building that's going to stand the test of time. And I think just lastly, to close on that point, I think, for us, one of the things that's really, really important, and I just spoke about those core markets, is definitely track record. And I'll just touch on back that now. We've just got a few pictures up there for those that can see it. We've got literally dozens and dozens and dozens of these. Like Daniel said, about 50 odd projects since 2014 alone, and many, many more before that. So one of the things that we encourage people to do before they speak to anybody, particularly if they're going to buy off the plan and they can't see and touch that piece of real estate, is it's really critical to understand the track record of who's making the commitments or promises to you as the buyer. And the best way to do that is to ask for a full list of everything that developer has ever built, and to physically go and see it. We give people a full list of every project that we've ever delivered since Mosaic was formed. And we give people the addresses, buyer profiles, an understanding of when that project was finished. And then we encourage them to go and look without us knowing that they're going to have a look. And that's one of the things that keeps us from a benchmark around key performance indicators for our staff, is that we need to understand that on any day at any given time, somebody could be judging the decision to buy into a Mosaic project based on projects we've completed previously. So really important that you understand the track record element. But I think if you get locational advantages, you get the quality piece as well as what it feels and looks like, the design and finishes, then along with understanding the track record and obviously the amenity side, then my view is that in South East Queensland, particularly over the next sort of 5 to 7 years, I don't think you can go wrong.
Thanks, Brook. I mean, we're going to talk now a little bit about, I suppose, South East Queensland, just generally, and what's happening across the market. I've got to say, I mean, personally, I've always loved, as a Melburnian, as a Victorian, born and bred, and I've always loved visiting Queensland, whether it be for work or whether it be for holidays, and holidayed in Queensland from a very young age. Fortunately, and I suppose over the last couple of years, it's only been probably the last 3 or 4 years that I've had a really serious look about South East Queensland as an investment location, and particularly in the last 6 months, I think with some of the shifts we've seen in the market, with some of the big banks and other analyst groups that are now starting to talk about South East Queensland in a far more positive light, and also probably frankly almost like the diamond in the rough at the moment. It has that type of profile. I've personally been having a much closer look at South East Queensland. I think all investors should be at the moment. The fundamentals are just really strong. The whole fundamentals around supply and demand are really strong. But the pipeline of infrastructure investment in the South East Queensland is mind-boggling. It's $75 billion the state government's or the governments are spending in the South East Queensland market. It's incredible the infrastructure that's going in there and the demand that's going to support going forward. So, Brook, can you talk to us a little bit about so whether people are looking to invest in South East Queensland or buy into South East Queensland as an owner-occupier, can you tell us a little bit about what's going to be driving some of the growth over the next couple of years?
Yeah, sure, Daniel. I think one of the other things now that you've told everyone publicly that you're looking very closely at South East Queensland, I think that you should chat to one of our sales staff at the end of this call, mate, to make sure that we're meeting your needs and requirements.
You can hold me to that.
I've been very pro South East Queensland, obviously, for a long time. It's where I live, it's where I raise my family, and it's where our business is based. It's where all the families of our staff are based. So we love living here. Obviously, we're passionate about the region. I think the thing that's been game shifting for Queensland over the last 7 or 8 years is Queensland's always been known, I think, just about everyone in Australia and in the world as a beautiful place to come and spend some time. We've got, arguably the best beaches in the world with the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast. We've got lots of amazing hinterland, so a lot of green space for the size of our population. And so from our perspective, we know that it's a beautiful place to live. We've obviously got a warmer climate that's more consistent over a long period of time. We have beautiful winters up here. The thing that's really shifted is that we've gone from being a beautiful place to live from a climate perspective and a beautiful place to visit to a place whereby we've become a genuine world-class city. And I think infrastructure you mentioned, we're going to touch on that in a moment, but you don't forego anything now by moving to Queensland. In the past, people from Melbourne would have suggested that we weren't as culturally rich We didn't have a, as great a following, maybe in terms of sporting, key events. And then we didn't have the same level of infrastructure and being able to get in and around the city and north and south of both the coast. And a lot of that has changed substantially and is continuing to change for the better. So I think what's happening now is that Queensland, Brisbane, South East Queensland has been recognised as a genuine place to move to early, to raise a family and to create a long-term future for the next generation that are coming through. So we'll talk on a few of those things, but I think that's the biggest game shift that people understand. South East Queensland isn't all of a sudden a desirable place to live. It always has been. What's changed is what's come with that, the fact that you don't have to sacrifice anything now to move up to this beautiful climate. So if we just touch on some of the things that are happening at the moment, in our view, one of the things that's really critical around South East Queensland is that it's been a market that has, slightly underperformed Sydney and Melbourne in this last cycle. And we were, on the record back in 2013-14 suggesting that Brisbane wouldn't quite keep up with pace of Sydney and Melbourne in the last cycle, which was quite substantial from late 14 through to sort of 16, 17. And most of that was because we just weren't creating the same level of private investment jobs or the same private infrastructure off the back of public infrastructure funded by government. And that's really changed since about 2016, 2017. So whilst we underperform slightly, the great news around that is that our property is substantially more affordable. The average income from people from a dual income family in South East Queensland is about the same as Melbourne and only probably 2 or 3% off Sydney, yet our property is substantially more affordable. So I think that's a big driver. And the other big driver now is that we're actually creating jobs. So there's a reason for people to move here. It's a great lifestyle and the property's affordable, but we need to create jobs to get people to make the significant sacrifice to uproot and come home. We've seen that really over the last 18 months as South East Queensland has started to take the lion's share of interstate migration again. So, I think, with the decline in house prices, and I know you touched on it at the start, Daniel, there was a lot of talk in the early stages of the COVID health pandemic around what, might happen in the economy and what those flow-on consequences could be for residential property prices around Australia. And there's some fairly bold predictions made by a lot of economists and a lot of, including all of our major banks, to be frank. And there's a fair bit of, as there always is when you get something that's a flash event like this, where there was no playbook of how this was supposed to, resolve itself, because it's been 100 years since we've had a health pandemic of this scale that's affected every nation on Earth. So there was a lot of concern, rightly so, early on about what this might look like moving forward. We were of the view, and we're on record really early on in late March, early April, suggesting that, without knowing for sure, but we held the view that, the fundamentals were really strong going into COVID here in Australia. And Australia was the most desirable place in the world to live. I expect it will be even more desirable in 2021 and beyond, given how well that Australia, along with New Zealand, has managed the virus just about better than anyone else in the world. We've got stable property rights. We've got the ability as an island nation to protect our borders. We create an amazing opportunity through natural resources in terms of food and energy. So very self-sufficient. We can protect our borders with key allies, and we've got an amazing health and education system. And then on top of the lifestyle element, we've got this infrastructure boom that on a GDP per capita basis is now one of the strongest in the entire developed world. So I think you then look at that on a national context, break that down to Queensland, and the fact that we've got cheaper property, but the biggest infrastructure boom in South East Queensland's history, you can understand why Brisbane fared really well during the crisis. So, we had property price growth forecasts of sort of -5 to 15, as you alluded to at the start of this presentation, Daniel. And, we're now seeing ANZ, who was one of the most bearish, suggesting that Brisbane will have at least a 9.5% to 10% growth just in the next 12 months. Westpac suggesting that Queensland will be the best performing major capital city property market in Australia for the next 2 years at minimum 20% growth. So that's a substantial change from what we saw all of these banks forecasting only 6 months ago. And if you look at some of the key stats around time to buy dwelling index, Queensland has been by far the highest reading in that regards. Back in July, when things were still fairly uncertain, we're at 16.5%, which was 4 times greater than the national average. And I think the other key thing to understand that, South East Queensland's well past its peak supply. And I'll show a graph on that in a minute, Daniel. But what that means for people to understand is that Sydney and Melbourne delivered a lot more property in the previous cycle. So, Sydney has only approached sort of peak cycle late last year, in last quarter 2019. And Melbourne, believe it or not, was in first quarter 2020, yet Brisbane was back in late 16. So we're actually 3 years past our peak supply. All of that product has been absorbed. And then because of what happened with the Royal Commission into banking, which then followed by the COVID global health pandemic, a lot of supply that was going to actually start to come on in South East Queensland has been pushed out. So we're dealing with a critical undersupply property with the most amount of people in the country moving to South East Queensland more than anywhere else. And I expect once international borders open by mid next year, you'll see a massive flood of people internationally into South East Queensland. So we literally do not have the capacity over the next 4 years to meet demand, even with a delayed start to international arrivals. So that combined with the wealth effect and the fact that, you know, our tourism ministry here has done a lot better than people predicted, Daniel. I think that's a really important thing to note. People see South East Queensland as a very strong tourist hotspot. Our interstate demand for coming to Queensland will be significant as borders lift, which looks like it's going to be early December. I see an announcement today by the Queensland Labor government. But you've got to remember that the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, South East Queensland in particular, has actually maintained almost full occupancy over the last 3 to 4 months, despite even borders interstate being closed. So it shows you how resilient that market is, and also shows how less reliant that South East Queensland is compared to Sydney and Melbourne on interstate arrivals in terms of rental, student accommodation, property purchases. So a couple of quick ones will just flow through here which support that conversation. So as you can see there, compared to Sydney and Melbourne, we're 3 years past peak supply, which means we're about to come into significant undersupply. If you look at that with a typical sort of just over 7,000, and we're just talking units, not even housing demand. So on an average year, just to meet our average arrivals or net migration gain, if you like, in terms of the amount of people that come here and those that leave versus natural births versus deaths. And that accounts for a drop-off over the next 12 months while international borders remain closed. It sits at about a bit over 7,000 a year. And as you can see from that graph, and these are real number and data that have come from the best research house in the country, Urbis, JLL, Cordell's Price Finder, SQM, it goes on and on. You can see from that even with what's under construction, there's a bit of stuff in pre-sales there that will struggle to get off the ground. Typically speaking, you get about 30% of product to 40% of product in pre-sales in a normal market that gets delivered. So what that means is you're over 20,000 just apartments. That doesn't take into consideration land out in the suburbs that we're going to be short on over the next 4 years here in South East Queensland. So you can imagine what that's going to start to do to prices, and it's starting to show up already, including in rents. So migration, we spoke about that. You can see here that South East Queensland was the greatest beneficiary of interstate migration over a long period of time through the 80s and 90s and the early part of the 2000s. That reversed around just prior to GFC from 2006 to 2018, where Melbourne started to actually be the greatest place for overall net migration gain, if you like, relative to South East Queensland. That was the first time we lost that mantle in about 2.5 or 3 decades, and that turned back again positive to South East Queensland in 2018. And my view on that, Daniel, and not just because of what's happened with Melbourne and the second shutdown, my view is that what COVID's done is not completely changed the way we think and live. I think what it's brought forward is trends that were existing prior to the crisis. I think it's just accentuating how quickly they either come forward, or the momentum that was already established probably increasing at a greater pace than it would have occurred if COVID wasn't present. So interstate migration was tracking really strongly in the 12 to 18 months leading into the start of COVID. So our view is that South East Queensland, in terms of an interstate context, will be the greatest beneficiary of people, and more so than would have happened had COVID not occurred. So I think South East Queensland definitely is the best story when it comes to that. So moving on from that, I think one of the other things outside of the interstate migration piece that's really important, I'll just click through to that next slide, is affordability. I touched on that before, just to give some people some context. And we're talking about, South East Queensland and the best markets that we're in. So premium coastal luxury, and that's sort of 2 to 8 Ks from Brisbane CBD. So we're not talking, affordable property out in regional centres. So we're taking the most premium property in South East Queensland. Even considering that, your average time to pay off a dwelling is only about 6.5 to 6.7 times versus sort of 7.5 and 8.5 in Sydney. And when you consider that the net take-home income on an average household, particularly for dual income, is about the same as both states. It's actually slightly better than Melbourne and slightly less than Sydney, but roughly the same. It just shows you how much more affordable. In other words, people moving to South East Queensland get a lot more for their money. And that's been the case for some time. So you've got all these factors attracting people to move here. And then, the kicker is that you get a lot more for your money if you're buying really good real estate in good suburbs. So low future supply, high demand, we believe is putting a lot of pressure, and we're seeing it in the market. We've been vocal about this since the start of the year on where rents are at. Rents typically are a really good lead indicator, and I know iBuyNew is a big believer in this, Daniel, particularly on the investment side. It's a lead indicator because people can make decisions around moving from a rental perspective faster than they can typically for moving in and out of an owner-occupier style property. So renters move quickly because they've only got to sign up for 6-month leases. So typically the data around rental performance is a good lead indicator of what's going to happen in price gains in your owner-occupier property moving forward over the next 2 years. And what we're seeing is that rental vacancies are now down to 2% in Brisbane, and between 0.5% and 1.5% on the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast respectively. Well, that's ridiculous. So once you get below sort of 2%, the market's pretty much fully supplied. And that's why we've seen rents climb even during COVID. So we look after a bit over 1,000 properties that we've delivered in the past that people rent that don't actually live in for owner occupancy. And we've sat at 0% vacancy rate through the bulk of COVID. We sit at 0% now. And we've had on average, Daniel, between $30 and $50 a week rent climbs over the last 3 months for those properties that have come up for release. So that doesn't happen if you've got a market that's either struggling or it's oversupply. So we think that's going to be very supportive for net yields. And how that's flowing through is you get, rental yields on average in Brisbane and South East Queensland of 5.2% versus about 3.5% in Sydney and Melbourne. And then when you think that you can sign up for a 3-year fixed mortgage at the moment for below 2%, and you've got a gross yield on average of 5.2 in a market that's undersupplied, you can start to see what that's likely to do for investment performance over the next 5 to 7 years in South East Queensland. So yeah, the rebound is definitely underway in our view, Daniel. I think and for those that have followed our research through the crisis, and we started from late March to early April, putting out our Crossing the Bridge series, which we felt was really important at a time when there's a lot of uncertainty and I guess anxiousness from a lot of people, just given everything they were reading on a daily basis. We had a view that the recovery would be a lot swifter than many people were suggesting, including most bank economists at the time. And our view was that if we could bring the virus under control and that a vaccine could be in play by the first half of 2021, all of which is now played out here in Australia and around the world, certainly from a vaccine perspective, then our view was that we'd start to see very accommodative both fiscal and central bank support, which were the lowest rates in history, and a job market that is likely to recover a lot faster than even the RBA is suggesting, we think is very, very bullish in South East Queensland from sort of late 21 through to 24, 25. So, and just on that, Brisbane's already outperforming. So, we had, in the peak of the crisis, Dan, it's a really good point to note here, and we had this chat just recently. We've had positive price growth for over 3 months now, and we expect that that's going to show 4 months in a row. Once you see October data shortly in November that'll follow, we had a fall of only about 1% from the record high in April, and then we've bounced since then. So, Brisbane, as you can see from that graph, from the worst of the COVID experience, is actually now back in front from where we were leading into COVID, which was all-time high. So really promising and supportive of all the data that we're talking about. So, mate, lastly, I'll probably just before we go into some of the project stuff, and then I'll allow some questions at the end. I always get asked, so where to from here based on all of that? And I've only covered off, a fraction of what our research team puts out in the market around our view from a global macro perspective and how that flows through to micro aspects of property market demand for real estate now and moving forward. And we touched on a little bit of that just then. But our view is that despite, what we've experienced over the last 6 to 8 months, that, Australia is the envy of the world in terms of the position that we find ourselves in. We're already an extremely desirable place to want to move to want to come and live, to want to send your children, to want to go to university and to want to invest money. We think that accentuates further out the other side, and particularly given that we've managed the health aspect so well. We think the news about the effective vaccines and likely to be multiple successful candidates at very high efficacy rates, all around the sort of 90% plus, is likely to be in a distributable form, at least for frontline health workers, those with health issues and the elderly, by end of first quarter next year, and probably the bulk of those that need to get a vaccination in play in most of the developed world, certainly by mid-year to second half of next year. So the emerging world will take a bit longer, but we think that means that borders in Australia will open up the second half of next year once the vaccination program is well underway. And the fact that there's such a high efficacy rate means that we need less people to have the vaccination before those borders can open. So we think that's very supportive of a strong economic recovery. I think one of the striking developments that we've touched on, Daniel, is the strength of the housing market through the worst of the COVID period and how quickly that recovery is now starting, and with Queensland forecast by just about everyone in Australia to lead the way. And we can see that, as we've touched on today, in the numbers that are turning up. We think, retail spending, if you look at the data over the last little bit, retail spending continues to outperform expectations. There's a bit of built up latent demand from money saved during the COVID period, but also most substantially from the significant government support around the various packages that they have, that they've made sure is supportive of saving jobs and allowing the job market to recover. On a GDP basis in the developed world, it's been the biggest stimulus package in the developed world here in Australia, and I think it's been extremely effective. So we think unemployment recovers a lot better here than even the RBA is forecasting, to around about 6% by the end of 22. We think the peak in unemployment at 7.5 was in August, and we think it could be even as low as 6% or just over 6% by late next year. So you get unemployment back to there with the amount of money that's been pumped into the market at the lowest rates in history, with an undersupplied property market, and also, interest rates, Daniel, are low, but that also flows through to the impact it's having on savers. So, net savings sort of heading towards zero, fixed income becoming uninvestable, and you're getting yields of property in high capital growth locations of above 5%. That arbitrage of positive yields on high capital growth property with a very supportive economic economy, we think is very bullish over the next sort of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think with property, it's always a long-term view. But if you just think about that short-term picture, the next 6-12 months, I completely concur with your view there, Brook. I think as things start to stabilise a bit, there's a bit more certainty coming back into the market. As you say, the vaccination process sort of kicks off from maybe March next year. There's only an upside. I think what we do see is a real rush on property, and some of the stats you just sort of talked us through, the vacancy rates. My God, I mean, it's incredibly low. Anything, as you say, south of 2% is incredibly low. It's a full market. But the other interesting thing there is just the supply shortage that you've highlighted. It's incredible how short the market's going to become. I think with a rush on property over the next 12 months, it's only going to get shorter.
And just on that, Daniel, I think one of the things, most of the property we sell is into our retail market. So the bulk of our buyers, it's over 50% in all of our projects is owner occupiers, right? So those that buy for investment purposes with Mosaic do so because they know that there's a lot of owner occupiers in that building. It's where people want to live, so they know who the secondary market buyer is when they look to sell and make money down the track. So keep that in mind. We are predominantly a retail owner occupier market, people buying to live in our projects. We had the biggest September in the history of our business in 16 years in terms of not just the number of contracts that were issued and the number of unconditional sales, but the average dollar price of those sales. And I want to keep in context the fact that we haven't really had the rush on from interstate investor buyers yet because borders have been closed. So we're starting to see it now for sure. But we'll end up having the biggest year in our history, even bigger than last year, which 2019 was our biggest year for Mosaic. 2020 will be even bigger. And you've got to remember, April, May, and most of June were extremely quiet because of the complete shutdown of the economy. So it shows you how strong the bounce back and recovery is, and that is without the real investor rush coming back on, which we expect will be quite substantial in the first half of next year.
Yeah, so that's a good little point for us, I suppose, Brook, just to draw a line on South East Queensland and maybe start to just talk about a couple of your specific projects you've got running or coming out of the ground at the moment. We've got people, I think, on the call from Victoria, New South Wales, and indeed Queensland. But it's this is probably the most exciting stuff, I think. If the next 10 minutes, Brooke, if you could just talk us through these three projects. You've got the Sinclair in Brisbane, the Bella on the Gold Coast, and Avalon up on the sunny coast or in Maroochydore. And I think each of these three projects that I've sort of got to know sort of reasonably well over the course of this year, in particular, is locations just paramount. I mean, there's a bunch of things you talked through before. What's really important when you're buying off the plan, and I think these projects, obviously, as you've acquired these sites and developed these sites, those factors have been front of mind because the location is just outstanding. They're award-winning projects in many cases, but they are actually projects now that are sort of getting towards the end of their sales cycle. There's in most cases sort of 10 or 15% of the projects that are left, and very fortunate that we have access to sell those projects on your behalf. So, Brooke, perhaps if you could maybe sort of take us through in the next 10 minutes those three projects.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Appreciate that, and I'll be quick because there's all of this information will be made available at the end, and obviously any of you who want to find out more information can engage directly with the iBuyNew team. Just on the stock left, with all of these projects you'll see of sort of 85 to 90% sold, but I want to keep in mind that the stock that is remaining in these projects is not the stock that people didn't want. It's not the last. One is we don't produce any poor product in any of our projects. It's really important that every single apartment is an apartment that the local market wants. So we keep back some of the best stock to the very end in all of our projects. And Sinclair, you'll see when I touch on that the product that's left is the very best city view product, and it's the same in Avalon and Bella. And that's because as we get into construction, we want to make sure that we've got some of the best product left for those people that inquire directly for us. So outside of our direct buys through retail offices, the only way that you can get access to this under-occupied stock now is through the iBuyNew team. So I just want to cover that off. So quickly, Sinclair it's 2 k's in the CBD in East Brisbane. For those that don't know, East Brisbane is one of the most affluent and certainly from an historical importance perspective in Brisbane's history. It's mostly timber and tin, so a lot of character. Your median house price is about $1 million, and they are old cottages that need a lot of work on sort of 300 to 450 square metre blocks. So about 85% of East Brisbane, even though it's only 2 k's from the CBD, has a moratorium on any development. So it's called development control precinct secured. So in other words, you cannot knock down these pre-1946 or pre-war homes. So when the bulk of the suburb doesn't allow any further density, when you can pick up a site that took us some time to put together that has uninterrupted northern views of the city, about 600 metres from one of the biggest infrastructure development nodes in Brisbane, it's pretty special, mate. So we've got the Cross River Rail, for those that don't know, is our most substantial transport project in the last 30 years in Brisbane. It's over $5.5 billion underground network to connect all the key areas either side of the river. And one of the 3 major stations, there's substations, but one of the 3 major stations, which also has massive development around retail, commercial, shops, apartments, is actually only about 600 metres from the site. So that's underway under construction. We'll be delivering in the next few years. So you've got this amazing infrastructure. You've got some of the best schools and university in Brisbane, and you've got some of the most expensive real estate with northern views to the city and future supplies constrained by planning. So, we really focused on the fact that we don't get opportunities like this often. So it was 2 smaller buildings of 60 apartments that are connected by this sky bridge, which is pretty amazing. And the entire rooftop, which overlooks the city, is dedicated to amenities. So there's a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. As with all 3 projects I'm about to talk about, Daniel, they have on-site management, caretaking and concierge. So we run them like a hotel, managed by Mosaic, but we promote quiet enjoyment. So these aren't short-term letting buildings. They are buildings for residents that are protected for quiet enjoyment, but they are managed like a hotel and have the amenity of a hotel. And that's the same for all the projects I'm about to touch on. So as I sort of flow through this quickly, you'll get an idea of, I'll just touch back up here, Daniel, the that rooftop, which you can see in some of the renders further up here. You've got a 25-metre pool, which covers one building, and the other building is a rooftop cinema that overlooks the city. You've got a yoga lounge, you've got a commercial-grade gym, you've got a veggie garden, you've got all sorts of dining rooms and barbecue zones and landscape areas you can book out and go and sit with the people that come and visit you on a Friday, Saturday night and have a glass of wine and look at the city. So pretty special, mate, in terms of location. So there's some really beautiful 2 and 3 bedroom apartments left there, but the bulk of that now at sort of 85% sold is underway. And just to give some idea of timing, we turned dirt there in August. We actually brought the construction date forward. We were originally going to turn dirt in October, but we brought that forward to 1st of August. So, and you've got about an 18-month completion time frame. So you sort of, fast forward to early 2022 for settlement and move in. And remember, this project was launched, Daniel, in the middle of COVID. So we launched this to the market on the 6th of April. So if you want to know how strong the Brisbane market is, you will not get a better example. So the fact that we've been able to bring forward construction ahead of when we thought we'd start, before we even knew COVID was going to turn up, just tells you how rare this sort of real estate is. So moving on from that, and so just, as you've asked for, mate, just one project in each of our 3 core markets. So we'll touch on the Gold Coast now. So Bella, so that last project will be the best-selling project that is Sinclair, apart from maybe the Queen's Wharf, which is mainly Chinese. Best-selling project in Brisbane this year. The best-selling project in Gold Coast last year was Bella, the one up on the screen now. So we're just over halfway, we're well over halfway through construction. Will be completed by mid next year. Once again, we've got about 7 or 8 apartments left high up in the building with permanent views, either north up and down the coast or panoramic all the way down to the border. Mermaid Beach, for those that don't know, the Gold Coast is the most exclusive suburb in the whole of the Gold Coast. It's actually, along with Noosa, the most exclusive suburb in Queensland. It's had over 50% of the highest priced resales of any property in Queensland over the last 20 years have come from this suburb. So we sit just off that most expensive street that most people know, called Hedges Avenue, and all of the real estate to the south and east, all the way down to Miami, is also development protected. So you'll see a common theme here, Daniel, putting together sites in highly affluent suburbs where the zoning and planning, as protected by the community and council, means that there's very little future development opportunity, which means more and more people want to live there, but supply is constrained in the future. So we've got permanent view corridors that are protected here. You're literally 150 metres walk to the beach. Across the road, you've got the biggest shopping centre on the Gold Coast, which just had a $1 billion renovation and opened again about 18 months ago. You've got the new light rail, which is going to go down to Burleigh and then all the way to Coolangatta into the airport. There's a stop about 100 metres away, and you're less than 5 minutes walk into over 50 restaurants and coffee shops in the heart of the Broadbeach precinct, yet you're in a quiet residential neighbourhood. So that's Bella. Once again, on-site concierge, the entire top floor is an executive club. You've got a resort-style pool, massive gym, day spa facilities. You've got business centres. The entire level 26 is an executive club with dining rooms and wine rooms that can be booked out. There's media and cinema rooms. There's a lounge and library, which has the paper and fresh fruit delivered every morning. So for Gold Coast, for only sort of 120 odd units, that's pretty rare to have that scale and quality of amenity and on-site concierge management. It's one of the things that Mosaic's been built on, is to create buildings that are built for quiet enjoyment of owner-occupiers, but they're run like a 6-star hotel without the scale and size of a 6-star hotel. So that's Bella, and you can see some of those renders that come through. And then lastly, we'll touch on the Sunshine Coast. So, Mosaic is the biggest developer of luxury waterfront apartment projects on the whole of the Sunshine Coast. We've got a strong association there. I've raised my family there for the last 14 years, so it's an area I'm really passionate about. Avalon was a site that set sales records again in this market when we launched it, and that was about 18 months ago. We're now approaching completion in March next year, when all the residents will move in. It's in a very rare stretch. So Maroochydore is in the heart of the Sunshine Coast. It's where, at the moment, our local government is building the first ever from scratch redeveloped master plan CBD. It's been the mastermind of the current mayor, who's done a fabulous job bringing this amazing project to life. There's sort of 3 or 4 years into it. The first commercial building and residential buildings are just about to open up. You may have seen in the press this week that there's been a $2.5 billion contract now signed with one of the biggest builders in the country to deliver the rest of the CBD over the next 3 years. So we are, within less than a kilometre away from this new CBD, about 800 metres away from the largest shopping centre on the Sunshine Coast that just reopened after a $600 million refurbishment. And we're on a northeast facing stretch of river, which is only 800 metres long, with very little, if any, future opportunity for other development. So it's the most exclusive riverfront land in the whole of the Sunshine Coast, maximum height of only 8 stories. So we're built on over an acre of land. It's just an amazing project. It took us 5 years to put this together, Daniel. The whole ground floor amenity is dedicated to, until you get to the river, to the amenity for the residents, no apartments. So luxury foyers, business centres, resort pools, gym, all the usual stuff, day spa facilities. And then you got watercraft storage and several pontoons where people can either get picked up on a boat or use watercraft such as canoes and stand-up paddleboards. So really special to us. We've got a few limited options left there. Just to give you some idea, for those that don't understand this part of the Sunshine Coast, the 15 riverfront residences, Daniel, were sold out in about 4 months from launch, and the average price there is between $2.5 and $6 million off the plan. So for those that think the Sunshine Coast is a smaller regional market, and it gives you some idea of how much pent-up demand there is for luxury waterfront property. So, you've got people we've got options here in that sort of 600 to sort of 750,000 left that are beautiful apartments with a view and an aspect that's got the same access to exactly the same amenity to those people that have paid $6 million in this project. So very rare in a market where the vacancy rate is now at about 0.5%.
Terrific.
So that's probably, I'm just conscious of time. That's a quick wrap. Obviously, you can see the Avalon project there on the riverbanks in the heart of the Sunshine Coast with connection to fresh water and salt water. But just conscious, Daniel, of answering any questions that might have come through given the time frame.
Yeah, thanks, Brook. There's a couple of questions that have come in, so let's try and pick these up to start with, and then we'll try and wrap things up. There's a question, Brook, just about Avalon, the project there. How many apartments are actually still remaining for sale?
Yeah, there's 5 apartments remaining in Avalon. I believe there's 6 apartments in Bella, and I believe there's 10 apartments in the Sinclair all up. So, and all of those are, we call that developer held stock. So we sell through the rest of the building, and then only once everything else is sold, we then make that available to the market. So there was a dozen developer held pieces of stock in Avalon, which we only launched back to the market about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So of those 12, 7 have now gone to the local market. So yeah, there's limited options left, but there are still some really great options, and at a price point that, when you look at the amenity and what's been delivered there, Daniel, my view is you'll never get that chance again to go and live in a riverfront building with that level of amenity in that location for between $600,000 and $750,000.
Mm. Yeah, and obviously, Brook, we've only spoken, this evening about 3 projects. There's many other projects that Mosaic have got within your current pipeline, which we can talk to potential buyers about. Well, there was another question just around whether we work with buyers agents. I can handle that one. We certainly do, and whoever did raise that question, if you'd like to reach out to one of our team at iBuyNew, we're happy to talk to you on that basis. Look, Brook, there's no further questions that have come in. Just checking once again. There's no further questions that have come in. So look, we'll probably wrap things up. I did want to say thanks to everyone that's joined us. It's been hopefully a worthwhile session for you. Over the course of probably the next 20 minutes, in fact, in the next 10 minutes, you should receive to your email a short questionnaire. In that questionnaire, please, if you could give us a couple of minutes of your time to give us any feedback. If you've got any interest at all in these projects or in buying new property off the plan, please indicate that in the questionnaire. One of our team will be in touch and try and help you out. We've got as I said before, we've got these 3 projects we've spoken about, but there is a whole range of other projects that Mosaic have got in the pipeline and already available for sale or coming up. And we can talk to you about some of those projects as well.
And on that note, Daniel, I think we've had 4, and we're very selective about allowing much property available for this new project we just launched at Burleigh down the Gold Coast with your team down there. I've already had 4 buyers that have come through iBuyNew that are local buyers that found out about Mosaic, because the stock is withheld and you can only buy direct off the developer unless you come through a local agent that's been approved or it's come through iBuyNew. So we've already had, and that's only a soft launch that just occurred only a couple of weeks ago. So that's a project too that some of the people on the call might want to find out about. That's Grace down at Burleigh Heads on the Gold Coast. Yeah,
no, it's a great project. I love Burleigh myself. I think you might even find there's one more that may have come through today, Brook. But there's plenty to talk about. So if you do have some interest in, and it may be investing outside of South East Queensland. Obviously today's webinar has been about South East Queensland, so we suspect most of the interest will be there. But if it's on other areas, please indicate that on the questionnaire that'll come into your inbox shortly. And Brook, thank you very much for giving us an hour of your time. Really appreciate it, mate. And that was hopefully for everyone that's had a chance to join us, really educational, and hopefully they've taken something from that. So, mate, thanks for your time.
Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity as always, Daniel. Keep up the great work, and thanks for everyone who logged on.
Okay. Thanks again, Brook. Cheers all. Hope you have a good evening. Thanks for joining.